We are in a season of change when it comes to DC Comics, DC properties, just Warner Brothers Discovery in general. Obviously, we've had the merger, and they're changing the way that they've done business in the past, specifically with licenses. DC Comics were instructed specifically by Warner Brothers Discovery to start creating character Bibles. And a lot of people behind the scenes, not the writers, but the staff that are actually supporting DC Comics and work for them full time, are very worried that this is in fact setting up to license out at least some of the properties at DC Comics. Obviously, we've heard the name Todd McFarlane here and there. We do have some stories to kind of back this up, not specifically about DC Comics, but the way Warner Brothers Discovery are doing business and how it's a dramatic change from what they were doing before. This information is from a Hollywood Reporter article titled David Zaslav's Strategy Shift, Licensing Out Warner's IP Treasure. This is what Warner Brothers Discovery CFO Gunnar Weinfels said at a Bank of America event on September 8th. We have a ton of content that has been sitting idly for just pure principle reasons. The Lord of the Rings is a great example. It is a non-exclusive window, and we look at it as, what are we giving up versus what additional revenue we are generating? The CFO added, noting there are positive knock-on effects on our own platforms as well. Warner Brothers Discovery received an undisclosed sum in licensing revenue, effectively monetizing a film that had been, in Weinfeld's words, sitting idly, while Amazon was able to engage potential TV series viewers ahead of its launch with the iconic film. We heard these numbers and figures before David Zaslav actually took over as the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery. He was looking for $3 billion in cost savings for the new company. Now, this isn't exactly that, but it is revenue generation. This indicates that Warner Brothers Discovery are not only looking for cost savings, they're looking for new avenues of revenue generation. Now, a lot of people, especially if they have new streaming platforms, your Disney Plus, Peacock, Paramount Plus, all these streaming services associated with these big entertainment brands have been hoarding and absolutely hoarding their content and whatever, and they don't want to get out. They want it all to be exclusive to their platforms. David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery are taking a different approach, which I think is probably more thoughtful and smart in the long run. And there are no indications that these new revenue sources, this new revenue generated, is going to change David Zaslav's mind when it comes to the cost savings. So they're looking for revenue generation, but most importantly, they're still looking for cost savings. And I think we're going to see a lot more licensing out of things that maybe Warner Brothers Discovery aren't utilizing at this moment. DC Comics would not be one of those. Obviously, they do have a robust publishing line when it comes to the comic books. They're putting out over 60 comic books a month at this point. But I think DC Comics are absolutely going to get wrapped up in all the things that are happening with Warner Brothers Discovery. It's already happening with some of their characters. The Lord of the Rings isn't the only franchise Warner Brothers Discovery is willing to let others mine. A Batman animated series in development from J.J. Abrams is also being shopped around. Bruce Timm, Abrams, and Matt Reeves took the show on the road for a series of big pitches to major streamers this week and last. The series Batman Caped Crusader was originally planned for HBO Max before the Warner Brothers Discovery merger. At press time, Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu are all big contenders. So as you can see, DC Comics characters in some forms are absolutely ready to be licensed. They're on the table for Warner Brothers Discovery. How could this possibly affect the comic book division? What's interesting is what we saw with the Batgirl movie. It sounds like, from all appearances, that the reason that movie got canned is because, one, it wasn't very good, and two, it didn't fit the future and the vision of what the DCU is for David Zaslav. It did not fit into what he wanted to do with the characters. We knew they were going to do some crazy stuff with Batman. They were going to try and elevate Batgirl up to like Batman status. They decided to scrap it and basically take a $90 million haircut so they could receive $20 million back in an insurance claim, losing $70 million in the process. That is a lot of money to make a point and stay true to the IP that you have. If you look what they're doing at DC Comics at this time, I don't think David Zaslav is going to go into the office and say, Jim Lee, what the hell's going on? I want to know what you're doing with Superman. But when the word gets to him, and he finds out what they've done with Superman, Batman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, all these characters that are so important to the future of the DCU that they see as billion-dollar franchises, and they realize how bad they bungled them in the comic books themselves. I don't see how licensing out the properties can't be on the table. We do know in the past the subject of licensing out DC characters was approached, but very briefly because the numbers that were being tossed around of what it would cost to actually license out the characters from DC Comics when AT&T was in charge were so astronomical, it was essentially a non-starter. I think David Zaslav and the team behind Warner Brothers Discovery are going to be a little bit more reasonable when it comes out to licensing these properties, especially if what DC Comics are doing is failing. It's not generating enough revenue for the budget that it has when they can license the characters out and just get guaranteed revenue and not have to have really a budget for it at all. Just licensing out a select handful of characters that aren't working for DC right now would be a pretty smart strategy. It certainly worked for Marvel Comics in the past, but we'll see what's going to happen. The decision is a major shift for the company, which under Jason Kilar and AT&T withheld as much content as possible for HBO Max. Warner Brothers is no stranger to licensing content, with its TV division having long been one of the most aggressive about selling shows to other networks and platforms. But the message from the C-suite seems to be clear. There's a new sheriff in town, and they are willing to deal even more. It's also a stark contrast to Disney, which has leaned into controlling all of its content. If you're David Zaslav and you're Warner Brothers Discovery, why go out there and spend $200 or $300 million when you're trying to save, $3 billion in total, when you could license the property out and cut that down to way less than $1 million in annual budget, just as far as oversight of DC properties when it comes to comic books themselves. It almost feels like a no-brainer. I don't think this is written in stone. Certainly DC Comics do have a reboot of the comic book universe coming up in 2023, and I think this might be a last hurrah, a Hail Mary pass, if you will, to see if they can get these numbers up and let the people at Warner Brothers Discovery know DC Comics as a publisher has a place in the future and can generate enough revenue to justify their existence within the new Warner Brothers Discovery ecosystem that's going on as far as entertainment. It certainly backs up a lot of the back channel information that I'm getting in regards to what's going on at DC Comics right now. If you hadn't seen that, or maybe you missed the video, here's the full content on that, the rumors that I'm hearing, what's going on with the character Bibles, and why it might mean that DC Comics could be licensed out in the future. If you don't see it there, there's also a link in the video description.